Have you been able to enjoy the nice weather that we've been having?
I'm actually out of town at the moment. I'm over in the UK actually. So
Ah.
uh is the weather actually been nice or has it been or has it been rainy?
I mean, it's raining here and there, but
Yeah.
the last few days have been sunny. It's supposed to be sunny the rest of the week, 60
Oh,
degrees.
nice.
Yeah, finally.
Maine spring is such you never know what you're gonna get. It could be beautiful and sunny or it could be, rainy and 38 degrees.
Yeah, I'm not looking for a repeat of last summer. I'd like a couple of nice days, you know?
Yeah, last June especially last year, it felt like it rained every single day.
Yeah. It turned my backyard into a swamp.
Yeah.
All right, we'll give it a couple more minutes for folks to come in.
Okay.
Hi, Michael. Welcome. It's like we have someone calling in today. Welcome. In the interest of time, we'll go ahead and get started. People will be able to trickle in as they come. And of course, this is being recorded, so we will send this workshop out to all registrants afterwards. And want to say thank you for joining us today. My name is Dan Reed with SCORE Maine. And we have Tom Kittredge here with MTI, who's going to share a little bit about MTI, Maine Technology Institute, the grants and programs that they have available, and whether or not they might be a good fit for your business. And I want to say thank you to both Tom and MTI for being a major fiscal sponsor for SCORE. And with that, I will pass it over.
Great. Thank you so much. It's great to be here. Let me see if I can share my screen and then go into. Is that
Looks,
showing up in full screen for you or presentation mode?
I just went into presentation mode.
Perfect. Great. Excellent. Well, like I said, it's great to be here. I've done a few of these at this point, and it's always fun to kind of come and chat with the SCORE community. I really appreciate the opportunity. Generally, this presentation takes around 20 minutes or so, so there'll be plenty of time for question and answer at the end. So to start, I'm just going to share a little bit about MTI, who we are, and really what our mission is. So MTI, and you'll see on the next slide, I'm going to share a little bit about our timeline, but we are a nonprofit, primarily funded through the state of Maine, whose mission is really to support innovation in the state of Maine with the underlying goal of creating economic development. So you can see here on the screen, I have our mission. I won't read it off, but really, the key thing to take away is that, our underlying goal is economic development, growing Maine businesses, and that in turn supporting Maine's people and encouraging equitable prosperity across the state. And the vehicle that we're looking to kind of do that through is by supporting innovation from Maine-based businesses. So just a little bit about the history of MTI. So like I mentioned, we were actually founded by the legislature back in 1999. That was when Angus King was governor. And at the time, Maine was, I think, second to last in the country in terms of investing in innovation, investing in research and development. And the legislature at the time felt that it was imperative that Maine invest funds into supporting businesses who are innovative, who are looking to do new things, so that Maine's economy continued to grow as it went into the 21st century. So you can see a little bit of the timeline of some of our key milestones here. 2005, we had funded 500 projects. By 2011, we'd funded a 1,000. At this point, it's definitely, I don't have the exact number, but it's definitely in thousands of projects. And over $300 million invested in Maine-based organizations. So we've seen just tremendous impact from this funding. I'll go into the sorts of funding that we invest, but it's been great to see some of the success stories that have come out of MTI. So in terms of kind of the scope of MTI funding, so just to give a sense of what sorts of companies we fund, the answer is, in terms of the stage of the business, we really fund all across the board. So we work with companies who are really early stage, who have an idea, and hopefully that idea has been validated to an extent, but might not even have a prototype or an MVP. but really just an idea that they feel has a lot of merit, and they've done some research and customer discovery to validate that idea, all the way up to companies that are in the market, who are generating revenues, who are profitable, but who are looking to continue growing their innovation, or maybe it's a business that's looking to branch out and do something new with a new innovation. And so that's also something we'd support. So in terms of key requirements for MTI funding, and I'm going to go into all of these in greater depth, but they are shared goals, which really means the shared goal of creating economic prosperity in Maine, innovative and forward thinking. So really that's that innovative piece I already touched upon. A Maine-based organization, falling within one of MTI's 7 targeted technology sectors, and access to one-to-one matching funds. Something I should mention here, so MTI has a few different programs that we support, and I'm going to touch on one specific one for most of this presentation, which is probably most pertinent to the folks here who are on SCORE, which is what we call business innovation funding. So that is funding available to businesses with an innovation. And that's generally, I would say, 80% of the folks who come to MTI are interested in that business innovation funding. We do offer a few other programs. So we offer something called the Federal Funding Assistance Program, which is a program to support folks who might be looking to apply for federal grants and they're looking for some help in crafting their application. We offer some support to other organizations like MTI, so organizations like SCORE, for example, who are supporting the entrepreneurial community. We have a program we call MERC, which is helping companies hire short-term consultants, and we provide a little bit of the funding for that. And then we'll also sponsor events. And I'll touch on those all a little bit at the end of the presentation. But why I wanted to highlight that is, assume when I'm talking through requirements and process and the like, that I'm talking specifically about this business innovation funding piece, which is kind of the bulk of what MTI does. So going on to, going a little more depth into what MTI is looking for in terms of fit to MTI. So this first one is economic impact potential. So really what MTI is looking to see are businesses who are looking to grow in Maine and create economic impact here. So, if you're a 2-person company and you have no intentions to grow beyond 2 people and you don't anticipate growing your revenues and you're kind of just planning to stay as you are, that might not be a fit for MTI. We're really looking for companies at whatever stage they're at to look to grow. Definitely the creation of quality jobs is a key metric we look at. But we also look at the growth of revenues. We also look at opportunities to attract additional capital into the state. And we also look at indirect economic impact. So maybe, you yourself are a small company, but you work with a lot of other Maine-based businesses who will benefit from what you're doing. So maybe all your suppliers are based in Maine. And as a result of the work you're doing, you're providing a lot of economic benefit to all of your Maine-based suppliers. That's an example of what indirect economic impact might be. Or maybe you're doing something that's going to be really powerful or transformative for the industry you're in Maine. That could also be another form of indirect economic impact. So MTI doesn't have specific numbers. We kind of take a holistic look at a economic impact potential, and then kind of make a determination as to whether or not it kind of matches what MTI is looking to see. The other thing I will mention on that front is that, like I said, it's really okay at whatever stage you're at. MTI is looking to just see the plan for growth, and also MTI understands that economic impact potential. If you're projecting a few years out, it is going to be a projection and it's going to be based on some key assumptions. So we just want to understand, why do you think you'll be, going from a 3-person company to a 5-person company over the next few years when you put forth an application to MTI? The next criteria is Maine-based organizations. So one criteria is registered Maine business. This is something that's required across the board. And that really just means the Secretary of State, Maine Secretary of State, has a Bureau of Corporations. And you can go online and register with the Maine Bureau of Corporations. That's something you have to do regardless of whether you're an LLC or a C Corp or what have you. And that basically makes you eligible to do business in Maine. And that's just a requirement across the board. It's pretty easy. It can take a few weeks to get registered, but yeah, it's as simple as going online and completing a registration. So that's one requirement for any organization or any entity that receives MTI funding, is to have completed that registration. The other requirement is, and I should add that, that's something that can be completed even by companies who aren't based in Maine. However, the other MTI requirement is that a business is predominantly Maine-based. And that's a bit of a fuzzy term, but really what MTI is looking to see is that a business is either headquartered in Maine, has the majority of its employees in Maine, has the founders or key decision makers based in Maine, but really has a very strong connection to the state of Maine. Certainly with and this is particularly true since the pandemic, there's definitely a lot of Maine-based organizations and businesses we support that have a number of remote employees who aren't in the state of Maine. That's totally fine. We're not looking to see companies that are exclusively in Maine, but we want to see a really strong Maine-based connection and kind of make the argument that you're a Maine company more than you're a company in another state or another part of the world. We also occasionally will work with companies who aren't based in Maine yet, but are looking to relocate. We often will allow them to submit a funding application, but we won't actually disperse the funds if they're approved until they've actually relocated. Innovation. So I've already touched on this a little bit, but this is really probably the crux of what MTI is looking to support. So businesses that are doing something innovative, and that innovation is a means for them to grow as a business and be successful. So we, in terms of innovation, we support new things, so new products or new services. We support significantly improved things. So maybe it's an existing product or service, but you've figured out a way to do it a lot better or provide a lot more value to your customers. Or we also support companies whose innovation might not be actually their product or service, but it might be how they create those things. So if, you might have a really innovative way of producing something, or use a really innovative material in your product, or have something really innovative in how you go about achieving the end result that allows you to offer your product a lot cheaper or a lot more high quality or what have you, a lot quicker. But really, it has to be a substantial innovation. It can't just be a little innovation on the margins. We're looking to see something that's meaningfully differentiated from what's already out there in a way that gives you a competitive advantage. Because again, MTI is looking at innovation as a means to grow your business. So we really want to see that because you're doing something new and distinct, it's going to give you that advantage and that ability to grow as a business. So some of the ways we look to, we use the term differentiation a lot. So how are you different than your competition and the alternatives that are already out there? And how are you providing something that's of more value to your customers than what they can find elsewhere? And some of the ways we're looking to see that demonstrated is through customer discovery, which means, talking to prospective customers, understanding what they're looking for, and, kind of affirming that what you have is something that's of value to them. Market research, so that can be, conducting your own market research or finding market research. And then review of existing IP. So IP means intellectual property. So, going out and seeing if there's any patents or, protections in place that would limit your ability to do what you're hoping to do. All right. So MTI, when we were established back in the late 90s, the state of Maine targeted us with supporting 7 technology sectors that at the time were perceived as being key to the economic growth in Maine. So those are biotechnology, composites and advanced materials, environmental technologies, forest products and agriculture, information technology, marine technology and aquaculture, and precision manufacturing. A couple things to note here. So one is that, we often work with companies who fall within multiple sectors. So, sometimes you'll have a company that is doing something in biotech, but they're also in information technology. So maybe, they're a healthcare startup and a key part of what they offer is via a platform, but they're also doing something on the biotech side. So that's, just to note that you don't have to fall within only one sector. You might fall within multiple sectors. Also, we're really looking for the innovation to fall in one of those sectors, more so than the organization. So again, you might be a company, maybe you're a company who technically would be considered in the tourism space, but because you have a really innovative platform, that the innovation itself falls in information technology. So it's really the innovation that we're looking at to see what sector it falls within, more even so than the business itself. And then the last thing I'll say is generally MTI tries to keep a very open mind when it comes to how we determine sectors. So generally, if you're able to make a strong innovation case, in my experience, we're able to kind of fit you into one of these sectors. It's pretty rare for an organization to meet all of MTI's other criteria and have the sector be the thing that really holds them back. It's not unheard of. It has happened on occasion, but generally MTI tries to keep a really open mind when it comes to whether or not an innovation falls in one of these sectors. And the state of Maine, when they designated these sectors, didn't really provide any definitions to what they meant. So that's given MTI a lot of latitude in kind of defining them ourselves. But if you are curious to know more about how MTI thinks about those sectors, if you go on our website, you'll see there's a one of the pages is just going through the sectors, and it talks a little bit more about how MTI thinks of each of those sectors. And that can also be a conversation you can have if you end up submitting a request to talk to an MTI representative. They're happy to kind of chat through the sectors with you. And then access to matching funds. So this was another actually requirement that was put in place when MTI was established, that for any MTI award, we have to see matching funds. So really what that means is, let's say you come to MTI with as a business, as an applicant, and you're looking for funding to support a project to help move your innovation forward. So let's say you're looking for funding to help support a sales and marketing campaign of your new product, and that's going to cost $100,000. MTI could potentially, assuming you meet all the other requirements, provide up to half of that. So if it's $100,000, for simplicity, that would be a $50,000 award from MTI. The other half would have to come from another source. So that can be from the business itself, if they have those funds available. That can be from the founders. That can be from outside investors. That can be from a bank loan, a credit line or credit cards. It could be from another grant if you've received another grant. Something we've been seeing a lot lately is the Rue Institute has some programs where they provide grant funding to participants, and often Rue Institute companies will then choose to use the grant they receive from the Rue as a match for an MTI request. So that would be an example of that. The only limitation to that is it can't be matched from either another MTI funded program or another state of Maine funded organization. So a couple areas where that can sometimes get a little tricky is, so MTI funds a number of kind of competitive, what's the word I'm looking for, like pitch competitions in the state of Maine. So for example, Top Gun, if folks are familiar with that award is actually funded through MTI. So if you win a Top Gun award and then come to MTI and try to use it as match, it's kind of considered MTI funds already. Another example would be the Maine Venture Fund, which is our sister organization. It's also funded through the state of Maine. So generally we can't use Maine Venture Fund funds to match MTI, but those are pretty uncommon restrictions. Generally, MTI can be quite flexible as to what we consider matching funds. The one other thing I'll mention, and this is especially pertinent to very early stage companies, and generally that's the context in which MTI would accept this, is what's in italics here at the bottom, sweat equity. So for smaller requests, MTI can generally accept a portion of the match as the unpaid labor of the founders. Generally, this should be no more than 30% of the request. So just to make the math simple, let's say you have a project that's going to cost $20,000. You come to MTI, you request $10,000 in MTI funding, and then you have $7,000 in cash match for the project, and then the remaining $3,000 a match is the value of your unpaid labor as the founders. So you're going to be working on the project. You're not going to be compensated for the work you're putting into the project. But if you were to hire somebody to do that work, it would cost X amount of money. Well, you can kind of use that to count as part of the match. So, and again, I'm happy to, this is often an area that folks have some questions and want some more information. So I'd certainly be happy to kind of elaborate on that during the Q&A section. So one thing, and I keep meaning to enter this into the slide deck, and this is probably where I can touch on it. So, I keep saying MTI funding. So just to kind of elaborate as to what that means. So there's a few different types of MTI funding available. There's grant funding, there's loan funding, and there's equity funding. So generally, when an applicant comes to MTI for the very first time, we work with them to provide grant funding, which is great for the applicant, obviously, because there's no expectation of repayment to MTI. You're not diluting your ownership in the company. So it's great. It's basically money you're getting, and there's no expectation from MTI that other than that you complete the project proposal you put forth. The reason that MTI also does loans and equity investments is that we have a $100,000 cumulative grant limit. So basically, an organization can come to MTI multiple times, maybe twice, 3 times, 4 times, and receive grant funding up until the point that they hit that $100,000 cap. And then once they hit that 100,000 cap, they're no longer eligible for grant funding. But sometimes, we'll see businesses who are in need of more funding than that. And in that case, MTI might be able to make them a loan or come along as an equity investor, so actually invest in the business. Generally, in the case of equity, that's something we would do as what's called a top off. So we'll be the kind of the last investor in. So if somebody's looking to raise $1 million and they've successfully secured 900,000 of that million, MTI might come in and supply that very last 100,000 in funding. Again, that's generally for more mature businesses. MTI, for loans and for equity, we do, with loans, we kind of think of it as a bank would. So we're not, we're looking to make prudent loans for businesses we feel confident that will be able to pay us back. For equity, we're looking to invest in businesses we think are going to scale and at some point have an exit and sell the company, and that will lead to a return on investment for MTI. But it is worth knowing that there are opportunities for MTI funding to grow with you as you grow as a business. But like I said, generally for the first time, if you come to MTI, we'll probably talk to you about grant funding. And you can see here along the right side of this graph, the cumulative funding amounts. So the amount of MTI funding that's available at any given time is influenced by a few things. One is, and that's kind of what this chart shows, how far along as a business you are. So if you are a very early stage business, you have an idea, you have some validation of the idea through customer discovery and through market research, but you don't even have a prototype yet, you'd be eligible for up to $25,000 in MTI grant support. Let's say you go a little step beyond that, you have a working prototype or a minimum viable product, but you don't have sales yet. Well, you might be eligible for additional funding, so up to $25,000 to $50,000 in cumulative MTI funding. And then let's say you start earning some sales, and you're able to actually point to sales as proof of concept. Well, then you might be able to max out your grant funding and maybe even go beyond. And then let's say you're starting to generate some serious traction. Well, that's where this kind of range for funding comes in. So the idea is, MTI funding scales alongside you. But we're also, looking to make larger funding amounts for companies who are really starting to show progress and traction in their market. And again, happy to kind of elaborate on that if folks have questions at the end. So I already touched a little bit on this notion of a project. So MTI funding is not kind of strings attached, or no strings attached rather. So MTI funding is designed to support projects that move an innovation forward. So we always look for any type of MTI funding, regardless of whether it's a grant or a loan or even an equity investment. We look for an applicant to put forth a project proposal that will help move their innovation forward. So all project proposals must have the following elements: 1 or more key activities describing the scope of the project. And so some of the examples of key activities can be product development, sales and marketing, customer discovery, market research, IP protection, etc. Clear, specific, measurable deliverables for each activity, an estimated timeline, a description of anticipated expenses, and the sources of matching funds. So just again, to elaborate a little bit on this. So let's give a hypothetical scope of work. So you are a company and you have a working prototype and you're getting ready to start selling, but you need some help developing marketing materials. And simultaneously, you also want to do a little additional product development. And also maybe you want to patent the idea. So you could put forth a key activity around each of those items. So one key activity focused on developing the marketing, one activity on the continued product development, and one activity on IP. And let's say that project in total is going to cost $100,000. So you're going to come to MTI and you're going to request $50,000 and then provide roughly $50,000 in matching funds. And then for each of those 3 items, so marketing, product development, and IP, you're going to want to identify some clear, specific, measurable deliverables. So for marketing, for example, maybe the deliverables are based around the content that you're going to have ready. So you're going to have, X items completed and ready to go by the end of the project that will allow you to start your marketing. Or maybe for the IP, the deliverable is just having filed the patent. So that's kind of what we mean by clear, specific, and measurable. We're really looking for items that at the end of the project, we can say, check, this was accomplished. Or if it wasn't accomplished, we can say, no, it wasn't accomplished. And then, we'll work with the applicant to understand why. Estimated timeline is pretty self-explanatory, but for each of the activities, we want to get a rough sense of the start date and the end date. The only thing I'll mention is it's very common for these timelines to kind of evolve through the duration of a project, and MTI really understands that that's the case, but we're still looking for an estimated timeline at the start to get a rough sense of how long the project's going to take. And then lastly, a description of anticipated expenses and the source of matching funds. So we ask you again, this is an estimate, but we ask you to roughly kind of map out how much is the project going to cost. And then, where are you going to provide matching funds from when you put forth a project proposal to MTI? All right. So application process. So exactly kind of how the process works. So if you think you might be a fit to MTI, and the fact that you're on this call is great because it's hopefully gives you some context as to whether or not you might be a fit. I'd also encourage you to look at MTI's website if you're not sure. But assuming you think that there's a decent chance that your organization might be a fit to MTI, then the first step would be to go onto MTI's website, select the program you're interested in. And again, this program that we're mostly talking about right now is called the Business Innovation Funding. Click on that program and then submit an interest form via the website. So there'll be a link on each of the programs for you to submit an interest form. That will basically trigger an MTI representative to reach out to you to set up an hour-long conversation. And that conversation will really be based around, it'll be pretty informal, but it'll be based around chatting through your organization, what sort of support you might be looking for, and working with the MTI representative to get a sense of whether or not it makes sense to submit a full application. So the idea is rather than just having folks submit applications right off the bat, it's better to have a conversation with MTI and get a good sense of whether or not you might be eligible, rather than putting in all the work of putting together an application and then finding out you're not eligible. But assuming that that conversation goes well and the MTI representative thinks that you're likely to be eligible for MTI support, the next step is to put together an actual application. And the key documents for that are a scope of work. So that's kind of what I touched on the prior slide. So describing the project. A budget form describing what are the likely expenses and the source of matching funds, and then an application itself, which is a Word document that asks you to touch on the economic impact potential of the business, the team, the innovation, the market, and the business model. And then await the MTI funding decision, which generally takes between 1 to 4 months. I would say the average is 2 months, but MTI kind of operates on a first come, first served basis. So that I should mention there's no deadline to apply for MTI funding. It's kind of just whenever you're ready to submit an application and you feel like your application is strong. But it is kind of MTI reviews application as they come in. So the amount of time it takes to get a funding decision primarily is just based on how many applications are ahead of you in the pipeline. It also will be dependent on whether or not MTI's team has follow-up questions for you, and sometimes there'll be a back and forth that can, slightly draw out the project or the process. And then if you are approved for MTI funding, there's reporting requirements. For a grant, generally the only reporting requirements is at the end of the project, we ask you to submit a report basically saying how it went and affirming how much you ended up spending, and just making sure we kind of hit the key deliverables from the proposed project. So when is a good time to contact MTI? So, it says intake here. We're now calling it an interest form, but, when is it worth reaching out to MTI and setting up a time to talk? These are kind of the things you should be prepared to discuss. So what is the problem you are addressing, and point to supporting evidence? And by problem, we mean either what is the unmet need of your customer that you're seeking to address, or what is an inefficiency within your business that you've developed a better process to solve something. But really you should be able to describe, what is the problem that exists and how are you solving it? What is your innovation and how is it differentiated from existing options? So it's helpful to be able to talk about what are the other existing options. who are your competitors, or what are the alternatives, or what is the current way of doing something, and how are you doing it different and superior? What customer discovery have you conducted to date? So by customer discovery, again, we mean going out and talking to potential customers. It's definitely stronger to go out and talk to strangers. Sometimes folks are like, oh yeah, I chatted with my family and my friends and they all thought this was a great idea. It's definitely better to have kind of impartial customers giving you feedback. That definitely strengthens it. It's also, MTI, I would say, would generally prefer to see actual conversations with folks rather than just sending out a random survey. I think in our experience, it's just been you get kind of higher quality feedback when you talk to a prospective customer. With that said, we certainly, survey results are better than nothing. Who is the team and how does your team have complementary skill sets? So generally, MTI prefers to see businesses with multiple founders as compared to a sole founder. With that said, if you are a sole founder, that doesn't make you ineligible for MTI support, but it's helpful for us to know that there are other people on your team. So that could be, either key employees, or it could mean that you have a board of advisors, or you have mentors, or, just people to bounce ideas off of who are kind of in the trenches with you, rather than you totally going in alone. What is the competitive landscape and market opportunity? So I already touched on that competitive part, but what is the market opportunity? So have you conducted any market research to show that there is a market out there for you to sell your product or service that will allow your business to grow? And then lastly, what are the resources you need to move your innovation forward? So that, again, you should have a sense of what sort of ask might you have from MTI that will help you move your innovation forward. So I just wanted to touch briefly. So that kind of is I think more or less all the key things to know about the business innovation funding. I touched on these at the start, but just very briefly, just to refresh folks now that they've heard primarily about business innovation funding. Other MTI programs. So the Maine Entrepreneurial Resource Corp is a pretty recently launched program. It's funded through the Department of Economic and Community Development. And basically what it is MTI has compiled a roster of Maine-based consultants with expertise in everything from finance to marketing to HR to intellectual property to workforce safety, what have you, really across the board. We have this network of consultants, and we are able to link Maine-based companies up with these consultants. So, provide access to this network, if a company comes to MTI looking for consulting work, and then also provide some funding to help support the consulting work, generally up to $15,000 of funding. This is separate from business innovation funding. So we often will have companies who, utilize Merck for a consulting project and then come to MTI business innovation funding for other work that needs to get done. And the Merck funding, and this is really nice, doesn't count towards that 100,000 cumulative cap limit. So I definitely, if you're looking specifically for a short-term consulting project, and by short-term, we generally mean up to a couple months, I definitely would recommend checking out Merck. It's great. I think they can provide up to 50% of the funds needed for the project to a maximum of 15,000 from MTI. And also we will provide you with a few different potential consulting options from the network for the work. So definitely something to be aware of. And if you're interested in learning more about that, the same link where you would submit a request to talk to an MTI representative about business innovation funding, you can also submit a request to talk to somebody about Maine Entrepreneurial Resource Corp. And we call that Merck in case if you see that MERC on the website. Another program is event sponsorship, which is basically MTI will frequently be a sponsor of events celebrating or championing Maine's innovation and entrepreneurial economy. So for example, if folks are aware of Startup Maine, we'll often sponsor a lot of their events. We help sponsor some SCORE events. We help sponsor a variety of other things, but they have to be related to the basically Maine's entrepreneurial and innovation economy. And they have to be focused on either celebrating or championing or providing education or building networks in the entrepreneurial and innovation economy. And I think generally the max for sponsorship is $5,000, but there is a little bit of flexibility there. Next is Federal Funding Technical Assistance Program. So MTI provides free expert guidance on submitting SBIR and STTR grant requests to the federal agencies. So SBIR and STTR, SBIR stands for, I think it's Small Business Innovation Research, and STTR, small, I don't remember exactly what they stand for, but basically what they are is most federal agencies have a portion of their budget set aside to provide grants for businesses in their sectors who are doing really innovative research and development. So, for example, the National Science Foundation, puts out a lot of grants for companies in the science field who are looking to do some really interesting, unique research and development. And MTI's role is we're able to provide free expert guidance on A, whether or not a company is likely to be eligible for the grants, and then B, also if we do deem you're likely to be eligible, we'll help you put together your grant proposal. So there's not actually any funding coming from MTI through this program to a business, but we're helping you tap into federal funding. And then lastly, entrepreneurial support organization funding. So that's grant funding available for other organizations in the ecosystem who are, helping raise up Maine's entrepreneurial economy. So, Maine Center for Entrepreneurs, or Dirigo Labs, or there's a variety of organizations in the state. Generally, 95% of the time, they're nonprofits, but not always, who maybe themselves aren't innovative, but they're supporting innovators in Maine, and so they might be eligible for MTI funding. So that was a ton of information. Thanks everybody for sticking around. It definitely took longer than the 20 minutes I'd expected, but hopefully that was helpful, and happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Tom. And for our attendees, please feel free to enter your questions in the Q&A or the chat, and I will convey them here to Tom, and we can get them answered for you. I know I certainly have at least a few questions, but definitely the first one that came to mind, and I kind of thought about almost the whole presentation, is that economic impact part, and how,
Yep.
especially if you're like an idea client or someone who just kind of has an idea, that can be a really hard thing to wrap your head around when you're in that idea phase and you're not exactly sure how that will turn out. So if someone is in the idea phase, like what would you recommend to them to try to get a realistic understanding of what economic impact might actually look like for them?
That's such a great question. So in the MTI application, the way we kind of frame it is we have a little chart. It's basically got two columns. One column is where are you today, and then one column is where do you hope to be 3 years from now. And it asks you, and by where, it's how many employees do you currently have, and how many employees do you hope to have? How much do you currently pay your employees, and how much do you hope to pay your employees? How much revenue are you currently making? And that answer might be 0. How much revenue do you hope to be making 3 years from now? But obviously, so it's easy to say, here's where I am right now. And often, especially for early stage companies, the answer is 0, 0, 0, 0. Right now, we don't have any full-time employees. We're not paying our employees, and we don't have any revenue. But it is a lot harder to project where are we going to be 3 years down the line. So part of it is aspirational. So, it's hard to anticipate, and it might be that the business fails, or it might be that it just takes a lot longer to scale than you hope. So part of it is, where do you hope to be? What sort of business are you hoping to create? So sometimes somebody's like, I have no desire to grow beyond just, I'm going to become a consultant for myself, and I just want to be a one-man team, and that's all I hope to do. So in that case, you'd put one person. It might be that you're like, I really want to grow a business, and it's going to create multiple jobs in the state of Maine. And so that, you'd put that. So that's part of it. It's also based on what are reasonable assumptions and what are the key assumptions behind your projection. So, if you are just at the idea stage, one of the things I would definitely recommend doing is sitting down with a SCORE mentor and doing a little bit of financial projections. And that, I know SCORE and has a lot of resources available to help folks kind of sketch out, well, here's how much I think I'm going to end up charging for this product. And I hope by year 3 to be able to sell 1,000 of these. And if I sell 1,000 of these products at this price, that's how much revenue I'll be making. And here's how many employees I think I'm going to need to be able to sell this. But again, definitely it's MTI understands the earlier the stage of the business, the more speculative the projections are, and our team is very familiar with seeing very speculative projections, and they'll kind of work with you to understand how you got to those projections. So, that's the first part to note, is just, understanding that if you're at the idea stage, MTI understands that your projections are speculative, but definitely tapping into mentors and folks who maybe have experience growing businesses to help kind of ground your projections. And then the other thing is, again, MTI takes a really holistic look at economic impact. So it's not just the number of employees, it's not just the amount of revenue, it's not just the amount of capital, it's all of those things together, along with, how are you going to interact with other companies in Maine? How are you going to, interact with your industry in Maine? So those things all get kind of taken into account. And then the very last thing I'll say on that is, for a range one, so our lowest amount of funding, our requirements when it comes to economic impact potential are quite low. So it is common for an MTI award to be made, assuming that all of the other MTI criteria is met, to a company that currently has 0 employees and is hoping in 3 years to have 2 employees or 3 employees. We're not looking for folks to make wild, projections that they're going to grow from 0 to 100 employees in 3 years. It's totally fine to put a reasonable projection of, right now there's none of us. We think that if things go well, there'll be 2 or 3 of us in a few years. That for a range one, for the early stage of MTI funding, is definitely acceptable.
Thank you. I think that's a great answer, and it kind of touches on that the old adage of like no plan survives the enemy, but in this case it might be more like no plan survives the market, but that doesn't mean that
Yes,
you
exactly.
come up with a strategy for that. We have a question here from Mary. She missed the first few minutes, and you did
Sure.
touch on this, but what are the requirements for incorporation or having an LLC or being registered with the state that you need to engage with MTI funding?
Yeah, so we don't have a specific requirement in terms of what we're not able to support sole proprietorships. Single member LLCs is fine. Specifically, sole proprietorship is the one kind of form of business that is ineligible. But pretty much any other form, so single member LLC, an LLC, C Corp, what have you, are eligible for MTI funding. So and you're welcome to be registered. A lot of MTI companies are technically Delaware corporations, which is a very common place for companies to get incorporated. But you do need to be registered with the state of Maine to do business. And really all that requires is going on to the state of Maine's Bureau of Corporation website and filling out some information. I can't recall whether or not there's a fee to get registered, but if there is, I think it's pretty small. And that's all. That's really all it takes. And the reason that you can't be a sole proprietorship is because the Bureau of Corporations itself won't accept sole proprietorships to register. So as a result, they're eligible for MTI funding. But pretty much any other configuration is eligible to register with the state of Maine. And then the other thing I'll mention is that's just a requirement for MTI to actually put funds out the door. It's not a requirement to have a conversation with MTI. So if you're feeling a little confused or lost by that process, you're welcome to set up a conversation with somebody from MTI just to figure out if you're eligible. It's just a requirement we have before we put money out the door.
Thank you for that answer. I think that actually kind of wraps into my next question, which kind of comes back to that economic impact. And I think, and tell me if I'm wrong, but that kind of, to me, economic impact means that it has to be more than just yourself. You have to be benefiting a group of people beyond yourself. And is that one of the reasons behind the sole proprietorship rule?
Yeah, I mean, again, I would say generally on occasion, MTI has supported has provided small amounts of funding to companies to single person companies. It's not ideal, but if it's allowing one single person to have a good livelihood, that is something. Also, the tax revenues, if you're generating revenue and paying tax revenues to the state of Maine, that also contributes to the economy. If you're benefiting other benefiting other businesses in the state, that has the potential for economic impact. But I would say it's certainly stronger if you can make the case you're hoping to bring on other folks in Maine beyond just yourself. and B, the amount of MTI funding you're eligible for is likely to be on the smaller side, compared to being able to tap into that full $100,000 of funding, which generally, to tap into that full 100,000, we're looking for companies that have at least a few employees.
Perfect. And if you have any more questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Uh, Looks like we had just one pop up here from Gina. My Maine LLC is a sole proprietor. Oh, it looks like she's still entering the question there. So we'll wait for you there. But in the meantime, I do think that is very interesting because a lot of times when people think about technology businesses and getting funding, they think of those like scalable companies that are getting a ton of investments. So I think it's amazing that there are programs that are also here for, I don't know if mom and pop is the right word, but the smaller businesses in Maine that aren't necessarily looking to scale and sell.
Yeah, certainly that, we're not required, if we were a VC firm, or a lot of professional investors are looking for companies that are going to, the term is exit, so that are planning to sell, and that's certainly not a requirement. Certainly not a requirement. That we're certainly happy to support businesses that are looking to grow in the state of Maine and don't have any anticipation to ever be acquired by another company or sell. I would say, scaling is always something that is something that MTI would like to see in an ideal world. But like you said, scaling means different things to different types of companies, and scaling might be scaling from a one-man team to a five-man team, compared to scaling from, a one-man team to 1,000 people. Generally, yeah, we are looking for economic impact, and so if a business is planning to grow, that's going to create more economic impact. What we're looking to see. But yeah, we certainly are able to support smaller companies.
So we had a question here from Gina. It looks like she may have been denied for grant funding, but she's maybe looking for information on how she might be able to change her model. I'm not
So
100%
I would
sure.
recommend,
Yeah, go
Gina,
ahead.
you're welcome to, you're welcome to reach out to the person. I don't know if you worked with a specific person at MTI. You're welcome to reach out to them, but I can also, I'll put my email in the chat. It's tough to know without knowing all the specific background and context. But you mentioned as a small LLC, could I be reassessed? I certainly think if the reason you were denied is because you're a sole proprietorship, then generally changing over to a small LLC would address that. If you're declined for some other MTI criteria, then that wouldn't necessarily address it. But like I said, I can put my email in the chat, and happy to kind of talk about it more offline.
Yeah, and we'll, if you don't mind, Tom, we'll also put your email in our follow-up email, and
Perfect.
that
Yeah.
way folks can reach out as well.
Okay, great.
And
That'd be great. Yeah, I'm putting in my, I don't know if, yeah, I'm able to post to everyone. So I'll put my email in the chat right now.
perfect. And we had a question as well from Peter. Would a new method of producing a new food item be considered an appropriate type of technology for MTI?
I have a feeling I'm going to give a lot of these answers if folks keep. The answer is potentially. I mean, I would need to know more. What I can say is we've certainly funded food companies who have innovative technology or innovative production methods, if it's sufficiently innovative. We worked. There was a company producing blueberry wine, Bluet. I'm not sure if folks have heard of them. And they have an innovative way of producing wine from blueberries, and their actual production methodology was innovative. And because they had an innovative production methodology for creating that met MTI criteria. Another example of a food company is Good to Go. I don't know if folks are familiar with Good to Go, but they produce dehydrated food pouches for folks who might be doing long backpacking trips. And they have an innovative way of dehydrating and producing that food. And I don't know all the details, but basically it was distinct from what was already out there in the market. And as a result of that production methodology, they were eligible for MTI funding. So the answer, Peter, is definitely potentially. It would depend on the nature of the production and what the item is. And I will say, conversely, sometimes folks come to MTI and they say, "Oh, I'm a food company and I have a new recipe using that, you know, and generally if it's just a new recipe, that wouldn't be innovative enough. So it really depends on where it kind of falls on that spectrum. But I would definitely, you know, recommend reaching out to setting up a meeting with an MTI advisor to kind of chat through the idea more, and they should be able to provide some guidance.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tom. I think that was our last question. We will, as I mentioned, be sending out your emails. So if anyone else does have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Tom or reach out to your SCORE mentor. And we'll also send out the slides. We'll also send out the slide deck as well. Tom, if you can shoot that over to me, I'll make sure that gets out to everyone.
Sounds great. Yeah, happy to do that.
Thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a great day. Enjoy the weather.
Thanks all. Take care.
Bye.